In a small, isolated town, tucked away in the fog-covered mountains, there stood an old, abandoned house. The locals called it the Whispering House because, as the wind blew through its broken windows, it seemed as though the house itself was whispering secrets from another world. Few dared to go near the house, let alone step inside. But when Amelia, a journalist chasing her next big story, arrived in town, she scoffed at the legends. Determined to debunk the myths, she decided to spend a night inside the house and document her experience. With her camera and flashlight in hand, she pushed open the creaking door. The air inside was thick with dust and an inexplicable chill that sent shivers down her spine. She clicked on her recorder and began narrating.
October 3 RD. I'm standing inside the infamous Whispering House, a place avoided by all the locals. I'll be staying here until dawn to prove there's nothing to fear.
The first hour passed uneventfully. As Amelia explored the rooms, she noticed peculiar details: a child's doll sitting on a rocking chair, its eyes fixed on the door, claw marks on the wooden floor, and portraits with eyes that seemed to follow her every move. Then it started. A faint whisper echoed through the empty halls. Amelia paused, her breath hitching in her throat. The whispers grew louder, but no matter where she turned, she saw no one. The words were unintelligible, a mix of hisses and growls that reverberated within her skull. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. No response, just more whispers, now coming from every corner of the room. Amelia's hands shook as she shone her flashlight towards the hallway. The beam of light wavered, revealing a shadow that flickered at the edge of her vision. She stepped back, her heart pounding. I'm not alone, am I? Suddenly, a loud thud came from upstairs. Amelia gasped and sprinted to the stairs, curiosity battling with fear. Slowly, she ascended, each step creaking under her weight. She reached the landing and peered into the darkness. At the end of the hallway was a door she hadn't noticed before. It was slightly ajar, and a soft, red glow emanated from within. Summoning her courage, she pushed the door open. Inside was a small, dimly lit room. The walls were covered in scratched words, phrases overlapping one another, forming an incoherent mess. The whispers grew to a deafening roar as Amelia stepped inside. Her eyes widened as she realized the words on the wall were names, hundreds of names, each etched with a mix of desperation and rage. She turned around to leave, but the door slammed shut behind her. Panic surged through her as the red light intensified, casting grotesque shadows that twisted and writhed. Then she saw it, a figure hunched in the corner, its face obscured. The whispers ceased, replaced by a chilling silence. The figure slowly turned its head towards her, revealing hollow eyes that bore into her soul. "Leave," it rasped, its voice echoing in her mind. "Leave and never return." Amelia stumbled back, but the door remained locked. She clawed at it, screaming, but the house seemed to swallow her cries. The figure rose, its form elongating, limbs stretching unnaturally as it floated closer. With each step it took, the air grew colder, her body trembling uncontrollably. Just as it reached her, everything went dark. Amelia woke up outside the house, sprawled on the front lawn. The sun was rising, casting a soft golden glow over the town. She scrambled to her feet and glanced back at the house. The door was closed, and everything was quiet. Breathing heavily, she checked her camera. The footage showed her entering the house, walking through the rooms. But then, static. No whispers, no figure, no red light. Shaken, she looked down at her arm and gasped. There, etched into her skin, was a single name, her own. Amelia left the town that day, never to return. The footage remained in her archives, a silent reminder of the night she came face to face with something beyond comprehension. Despite her vow to forget, the whispers never truly left her. They followed her wherever she went, growing louder whenever she was alone. And every now and then, when the wind was just right, she could still hear them calling from that house, beckoning her back. Journalist Amelia had promised herself that she would never look back after the ordeal at the Whispering House. The incident left her with more questions than answers, and an unnerving sense of dread that she could never quite shake. Yet, the lure of the unknown and her insatiable curiosity drove her back into the world of dark investigations. This time, a peculiar case from a place called Shaded Pines caught her attention. Located deep within the Appalachian Mountains, Shaded Pines was a small town that was virtually unknown to the outside world. It was a place shrouded in mystery, where time seemed to move slower, and the fog that enveloped the forests gave it an ethereal, almost otherworldly presence. But what drew Amelia to Shaded Pines wasn't the isolation or the picturesque scenery. It was the unexplained disappearances of an entire family that had baffled authorities for decades. The inhabitants of the town spoke of a curse, a malevolent force tied to the old Amelia estate, a grand yet decrepit manor that had stood abandoned on the outskirts of the town since the mid-19th century. Amelia's research revealed that the estate had a grim history. The O'Malley family, once prominent members of the community, had vanished without a trace one cold winter night. Not a single clue was left behind, and subsequent owners of the estate reported strange occurrences, vivid nightmares, and sudden illnesses that ultimately forced them to leave. Amelia knew this investigation would be dangerous, perhaps even more so than the Whispering House. But as she stared at the grainy photo of the O'Malley estate, she felt an unexplainable pull. Something was calling her, urging her to uncover the truth hidden within those crumbling walls. Day 1, arrival at Shaded Pines. Amelia arrived at Shaded Pines on a misty afternoon. The town was quiet, the kind of silence that felt almost unnatural. The locals watched her warily, whispering to each other as she passed. She could feel their distrust, but she was used to it by now. After a few inquiries, at the local diner, she was directed to the town historian, an elderly man named Mr. Jenkins. "You shouldn't be here, miss," Mr. Jenkins mourned in a low voice as he sifted through old newspaper clippings. "People who go poking around O'Malley estate don't come back the same, if they come back at all." Despite his ominous words, Mr. Jenkins provided Amelia with a worn, leather-bound journal that had belonged to Mary O'Malley, the last known owner of the estate. The pages were filled with entries describing strange lights in the woods, whispers in the night, and the feeling of being watched. Amelia noted that the final entry abruptly ended mid-sentence. "I saw it again tonight." Standing at the edge of the forest. It was that night, as she settled into her room at the local inn, Amelia read through the journal again. The more she read, the more unsettled she became. What had Mary O'Malley seen? And what had ultimately driven her family to vanish without a trace? Day 2, the first encounter. Determined to explore the estate herself, Amelia set out early the next morning. The road leading to the O'Malley estate was overgrown with vegetation, and the dense fog clung to her like a shroud. As she approached the manor, she felt a wave of nausea wash over her, a sensation she recognized from her time at the Whispering House. She brushed it off and continued forward. The O'Malley estate loomed before her, its once grand fide now a crumbling ruin. The windows were dark, and the wooden boards groaned under her weight as she stepped onto the porch. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the heavy front door. Inside, the air was thick with decay and something else. Something metallic. Blood. The faint scent of it lingered, though there was no visible sign of it anywhere. As Amelia explored the dusty halls, she came across a room that seemed oddly preserved. It was a child's bedroom, complete with old toys and a rocking horse. On the wall, scrawled in what looked like charcoal, were dozens of drawings, crude depictions of a tall, shadowy figure with glowing eyes standing beside the house. Amelia shivered as a cold breeze brushed against her cheek. The temperature in the room dropped rapidly, and she could see her breath in the air. Then she heard it, a soft humming, like a child's lullaby, drifting from somewhere upstairs. Heart pounding, Amelia followed the sound. It led her to the attic, where she found an old trunk. The humming grew louder as she opened it. Inside were more drawings, along with a small leather-bound book. The cover read, "The Journal of Daniel O'Malley." Flipping through the journal, Amelia discovered that Daniel, the youngest of the O'Malley children, had described seeing a creature in the woods, a creature that called to him, luring him closer every night. The journal ended with a chilling passage. "It wants us to stay. It won't let us leave. I'm scared, but I think I want to stay too." Amelia's fingers trembled as she closed the journal. The humming stopped abruptly, and the silence that followed was suffocating. She could feel a presence behind her, something watching, waiting. She spun around, but there was nothing there, just the empty, dusty attic. As she descended the stairs, she felt a sudden, intense pressure on her chest, like invisible hands squeezing her lungs. Gasping for breath, she stumbled out of the house and collapsed on the front lawn. The pressure lifted instantly, and she sucked in a lungful of cold air. Amelia knew she had to get out of there, but she couldn't leave. Not yet. She needed to know what happened to the O'Malley family. Day 3, into the woods. The following day, Amelia ventured into the woods surrounding the estate. The fog was thicker here, and the trees twisted unnaturally, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The deeper she went, the more disoriented she became. It felt as though the forest was shifting around her, leading her in circles. Hours passed, and just as she was about to turn back, she stumbled upon a clearing. In the center was a large, moss-covered stone circle, and within it lay a collection of tattered clothing, old toys, and bones, human bones. Amelia's heart raced as she noticed something else carved into the stone were the same drawings from the O'Malley children's room. The shadowy figure, always watching. But this time, there were more symbols, ancient runes that seemed to pulse with a faint, malevolent energy. She took out her camera and began documenting everything. As she moved closer to the stone circle, a high-pitched shriek pierced the air. She spun around and saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, a tall, shadowy silhouette with glowing eyes. Amelia backed away, but the figure moved closer, its footsteps silent on the forest floor. She tried to run, but her legs felt heavy, as if she were wading through water. The creature stretched out a hand, and Amelia felt a searing pain in her head. Whispers flooded her mind, voices overlapping, telling her to stay, to join them. With a Herculean effort, she tore herself away from the creature's grasp and sprinted back through the woods. Branches whipped at her face, and roots seemed to rise from the ground to trip her, but she didn't stop until she reached her car. Panting and bleeding, Amelia slammed the door shut and sped down the winding road, not daring to look back. As she glanced in the rearview mirror, she saw the creature standing at the edge of the woods, watching her leave. Epilogue, the aftermath. Back in her motel room, Amelia reviewed the footage she had captured. To her horror, the recordings were corrupted static filled the screen, and the voices she had heard in the woods played faintly in the background. But there was one clear frame that sent chills down her spine. It was the shadowy figure, standing in the stone circle, its eyes locked onto the camera. Beneath the image was a single line of text, written in a language she didn't understand. She consulted with Mr. Jenkins the next morning, and his face went pale when he read it. It says, "We are always watching. You cannot hide." Amelia left Shaded Pines that day, vowing never to return. But deep down, she knew this wouldn't be the end. Whatever haunted the O'Malley estate and the woods beyond had set its sights on her. And no matter where she went, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that something was following her, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Journalist Amelia thought she had seen it all after her investigations at the Whispering House and the cursed O'Malley estate in Shaded Pines. Yet, something inside her continued to seek the unknown, a hunger for the truth behind every dark legend. Her next journey led her to a remote village called Briar Hollow, where the locals spoke of an ancient, long-abandoned church. The villagers called it the Silent Church because no sound, no matter how loud, could penetrate its walls. The villagers said that people who ventured inside the Silent Church could scream, but not a single noise would escape the stone structure. Those who dared enter returned changed, if they returned at all. Curious and undeterred by warnings, Amelia knew she had to see it for herself. She arrived at Briar Hollow as dusk fell, casting eerie shadows over the cobblestone streets. The villagers avoided eye contact, moving quickly as if something unseen stalked them. In the dimly lit tavern, Amelia overheard whispers about the church. The bell tower had fallen silent centuries ago after a tragic service. Priests had been found dead at the altar, eyes wide open in terror, lips sewn shut with black thread. An old man, sitting by the fire, told Amelia that the church held more than silence, it held souls. Centuries ago, villagers sought refuge inside during a harsh winter, hoping for divine intervention. But food ran out, and desperation took over. The church became a place of horrors. People turned on one another, and the building seemed to close them off from the outside world. The priest, trying to save his flock, performed forbidden rituals. The next morning, the church was sealed and no sound emerged. Only the priest's mutilated body was found weeks later. Determined to uncover the truth, Amelia set out early the next day to investigate the Silent Church, a massive, Gothic structure overtaken by vines and moss. Her footsteps echoed as she approached the door, which groaned on rusty hinges as she pushed it open. Inside, the silence was overwhelming. She pulled out her recording equipment, but even her voice seemed distant. The church's interior was untouched by time candles, melted on the altar, hymnals scattered, and an ancient pipe organ sat in the corner. As she neared the altar, Amelia noticed faint symbols etched into the stone slab symbols she had seen before at the O'Malley estate. They were old protection runes, but these felt darker, more sinister. Suddenly, Amelia felt a pressure in the air, as if it had been sucked out of the room. The silence grew heavier, and the floor beneath her vibrated with a low hum. She stumbled back, heart racing, realizing the sound wasn't from her. It was coming from beneath the altar. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Amelia returned the next day with a shovel and flashlights. She had discovered that the land beneath the church was once a burial ground for those accused of witchcraft in the 1600s. Inside the church, she focused on the area around the altar, digging carefully until she uncovered a hidden crypt beneath the stone slabs. The crypt contained a twisted skeleton, its bones contorted unnaturally. In its mouth was a small, rolled-up parchment. As Amelia reached for it, the air around her shifted and the church door slammed shut. The hum returned, louder, and shadows began moving along the walls. Amelia grabbed the parchment and fled as dark figures with hollow eyes formed from the shadows. She barely made it out of the church, gasping as the silence lifted. Back at the tavern, Amelia reviewed her footage. The recordings were corrupted static filled the screen, and the hum from the church echoed faintly in the background. The shadows she had seen were barely visible, just flickers of darkness. But there was one image that chilled her to the bone. At the end of the recording, a shadowy figure with hollow eyes stood in the church doorway, watching her leave. The silent church still stands, and the villagers continue to avoid it. But Amelia knows the truth. Something ancient, something hungry, waits inside, watching anyone who dares to break the silence. Though safe for now, Amelia can't shake the feeling that the silence is following her. The hum that once filled the church now haunts her dreams.